everyone, and welcome to our little series for sales enablement. And we're talking today a little bit about how to measure impact and what impact means. But before we do that, let us introduce ourselves. We'll start off with our wonderful partner over here. Natalie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Charles. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie, and I'm the CEO of Sales Onboarding Now. And Charles, why don't you introduce yourself?
I am Charles. I am a sales enablement professional, and I focus a lot on content and how you do collaboration between teams to really have an effective sales enablement program. But today we are talking a little bit about, again, what does impact mean when it comes to sales enablement? And like, what are the different ways that we define that? Natalie, for you, in the realm of sales, in the realm of revenue and enablement, what has been like the definition of impact that you've come across between either professionals or your partners?
So this is such an important question because I think a lot of times we don't define impact, right? And then when it comes to proving ROI of the different initiatives that we do in the business, it gets really messy. And that's where it creates an unhealthy internal dynamic, right? So for me, impact really comes down to the bottom line, right? Like at the end of the
Mhm,
day, we're all in it to see the business succeed and
mhm.
continue to grow and generate revenue. And that is the primary responsibility of sales, right? To drive revenue. So
Yes.
enablement, therefore, um, is about supporting sales, right? And giving them everything they need to continually do that.
Yeah.
So I guess let's start there.
Yeah. And like, I think I'll add on a little bit to that. And there's so many different ways to have impact. As you said, bottom line, right, is revenue at the end of the day. But in order to maximize that revenue, there's different ways you can impact things. So, for example, operationally, enablement has to have these processes in order for us to produce content, trainings, launches in an efficient manner so that our reps get that information. So, that time it takes and the amount of people power, right, or the lift to get there is super important to be impactful. Collaboration between teams and communication, that's also impact in terms of how we develop that. So, on one end, we have these numerical kind of impact metrics. On the other end, there's like a little bit of the more complex, non-material things that is helping people to succeed, helping the business succeed. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, that's a really good point. I guess the tricky thing, right, is that there's like the very tangible, right? But then there's all the intangibles that need to happen in order to make that possible, right? So to your point, it's really important to have the right processes in place and the right tools. And there's a lot more that is required to be able to actually start generating that revenue. But it is, I would say, super important to start with having those clear metrics mapped out just so that you can more easily measure over time, like what's happening, what's working, what's not, and be more data driven in the approach overall. Because I guess the challenge becomes when we can get very easily wrapped up in doing a lot of different activities without really knowing how they are impacting the business.
Yeah.
So it's definitely it's a tricky thing, but it's very important. I think that not enough teams are having that internal conversation around, again, how are they defining what impact means, getting on the same page and knowing what to look for to make sure that is actually driving, the impact and results that they're looking for.
I'd love to share some thoughts, along with you and explore like what are the benefits of being able to actually share that impact?
I mean, from my perspective, it really comes down to understanding what the key initiatives and priorities are to drive, the results as a business and reach the goals for the year. And you kind of have to work backwards from there, right? So big picture, what are the goals for the overall organization? And this should, by the way, be these goals should be reached through all the key stakeholders in the
Yeah.
organization coming together to align on those, including enablement, being at that
Mhm.
table. Once there's alignment on what those key goals are, you work into, okay, what do we need to do to get there, right? And that's where the specific initiatives for enablement come into play. And that's how you start defining what impact means through that lens, right? And
Yeah.
I think that you stay motivated by, together as a team. Now you know how what you're working on is rooted in the bigger picture. So it's not just
Mhm.
that you're doing these one-off different things, because I've been there myself where it just feels
Yes.
like a never-ending stream of work and projects and one task after another. And it's
Yeah.
really demotivating when all you're doing is managing all these different tasks and you're not seeing any kind of impact come from
Mhm.
those. So then you feel like you put in all this time and energy, but nothing's coming out of that. So it's motivating for the enablers, but also it kind of damages the credibility and reputation
Yes.
within the organization, because now it seems like nothing is coming out of all those projects that are being pushed out. So yeah, I think again, just really getting rooted in the what it actually is driving against the overall goals for the company, and how important it is for those goals to be set with all the key stakeholders, making sure that those.
Yeah. And like there's that trust, right, that gets built when you're able to provide that impact. And I want to branch off of that as well, which is around having better collaboration with your cross-functional partners, because I think there is that form of trust that needs to be built, because we can't do everything ourselves as sales enablement professionals. We rely on our partners to either produce training content, to go up and facilitate training, to even just give us insights that we can provide in playbooks and coaching, etc. And so, in order to motivate them to spend some of their chunk of time for us, they need to trust us, right? That we're going to deliver results.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
that trust is so important, and I love that you're bringing up the collaboration, because um, everyone has cross dependencies, right? At the end of the day, enablement is not, we're not the product experts. We don't necessarily have all the insights into all the specifics that product is doing to make that solution the best it can be, right? We only know based on what we can extract, right? So, and then at the same time, I mean, from other teams within the organization, they don't necessarily know what sales needs to know in order to actually um, have all the tools and resources and knowledge that they need in order to produce.
yeah,
So there's, it's at the end of the day, it's a team effort. And without all aligning and understanding what are the overall goals that are bringing everyone together, it's really hard to come together. So
yeah.
it's
And
very.
like another thing too that I was thinking in regard to this is, funding as well, right? Because when like you said this earlier, and it was a very great point around when you are able to share that impact, you have clarity for prioritization. And at the end of the year, we're all asking for budget for either enablement initiatives and other cross-functional initiatives. And to be able to understand that impact, you now have ROI. And you can say, hey, these are some of the initiatives that we're strategizing for the following year, and this is how much money we need. And because of this impact that we were able to show, now you have this sort of model of an impact that you can provide forward thinking, not just backward results thinking, right? What are your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. I mean, what you just said, honestly, to me, surfaces that at the end of the day, we are all selling, right? So like if you go back to like as an enabler, right? Most of us have a background coming from sales, right? Where we've
Yeah.
we've been in that position. And when we're working with clients, what are we constantly having to prove? The ROI, right? That
Hmm.
what they're investing into is producing results, and therefore they're getting value, and it makes sense to continue investment. It's no different when you're an
Exactly.
enabler. You're proving the ROI of enablement, and that the projects, initiatives you're leading, that those are in fact valuable. They're producing results. And unless you can showcase and demonstrate and clearly point to that ROI, it doesn't really matter at the higher level, unfortunately, right? Like
Yeah.
unless you can prove it, it's not true. So Yeah, and that's where, again, it really comes down to that impact, defining it, making sure that there are clear metrics that you can use to demonstrate it.
Mhm. Yeah. Before I get to a next benefit that I'm thinking about, let me ask you, you are an onboarding whiz, right? Like you are a builder from the ground up in the early stages for a lot of different companies that you've worked with and truly understand. But I think you and I and everyone else who's been in sales enablement has had this feeling of like, I cannot do this alone because a lot of enablement teams start off with one person. And so, have you ever been in that situation?
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, when I joined remote, we were such a small team, right? So I think there were just the three of us,
Yeah.
myself and a director of enablement, and we all had to wear a lot of hats, and we all found ourselves stepping outside of our enablement hat and putting on a bunch of others and doing some product marketing and other related type of things. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, you end up having to do a lot more than just that area of
Yeah.
enablement.
And so, where I'm going with this, or rather the next step that I kind of wanted to talk about, is when you provide that impact and value, you're also selling your team to grow, right? So at Square, I had been there for about 6 years, and we went from a team of three people, similar to yours, to like a team of almost 40 plus sales enablers, creators, managers, etc. But you can't grow without giving a vision and without giving an ROI and what that impact is. And as you're like kind of growing from the smaller teams to the larger teams, the definition of what impact you can provide also changes, whether it's technology, whether it's the amount of people who can process that information. And I mean, we love the analytics folks who are able, the data analysts that can do that, but sometimes they're just not available, right? They're just not available. So being able to grow the team, have people who are experts in that and growing it, it's also just in a selfish manner. We want our teams to grow as sales enablement professionals.
Yeah, I mean, so you raise a few really important points here. First off, I've definitely gone through that too, of going from that really small team to a really massive team. And I think it becomes even more important, right, to actually be able to have those clear priorities to root everything, because I've seen this happen before where you're growing, you're adding more people, you have more people working on things, but again, it's not all rooted in clear priorities, and things start to fall apart.
Mm.
But what you said really stood out to me about how those priorities and the goals, they change, right? Like how we define impact change depending on the stage of enablement. And I think that's such an important point that you made there.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that more in the future because again, like you said, what you can show as impact, what you can report, changes over time as your enablement and your sales team grows or revenue teams grow, right? Depending on what your scope is for that.
Right. Not to mention too that your tool stack might change, and that gives you different ability in terms of what you can even look at from a data perspective. So yeah, absolutely. It all evolves and hopefully just gets better and stronger.
Who cares about the impact that sales enablement is reporting? So I'd love to hear from you, during that time where you've had to report these out. Who's in those rooms? Who is reading the documents? Like, who have you had to work with in regard to impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think that everyone cares, but especially the C-suite. So
Yeah.
the CEO, um, the COO, those are, I mean, I've definitely had a lot of CEO involvement and like seeing that they're the ones requesting that kind of data more than anyone. So
Mm.
I would say everyone should care, but the
Yes, of
C-suite,
course.
I was just going to ask, what about you? Who have you seen care most about it?
Totally. Sales leaders, of course, right? And I think there's a little bit of a caveat there is yes, they want to see the revenue of that, but they also really want insights too, right? Like how is the daily experience of their reps getting better through an enablement program? Are their team members growing and satisfied with their growth? So I've seen that, and we'll go into much more detail in regard to that for future episodes. But another one that I surprisingly, well, not so surprisingly, but the ones that really care are also product team members, particularly product marketing, who helps out with producing a lot of resources for the team, and also marketing and demand gen. And so, really identifying different pieces of impact, and from that impact, the insights to provide for them to better support the sales team or the revenue teams as well. And so, yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about details on what specific metrics each one of those teams are going to be looking for in the future.
mean, I think that um, what's interesting with what you were just sharing in the different roles is that a lot of this is dependent on how the org is structured, right? And it also goes back to the stage of the company, because if it's early stage enablement, it might just actually be housed under sales, and they're not really two
Yeah.
separate teams, right? So yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be different folks who care more or less depending on
Mhm.
the structure, but at the end of the day, everyone should care.
Everyone
And I think
should
you
care.
and you raised such an important point about how it's on enablement really to understand what what their different peers, right, partners in the
Mhm.
team care about and need to be able to be better partners. And that's where we have to be able to repackage and look at what data matters depending on our audience.
Absolutely. And I think, if there are any other sales enablement professionals watching this, and we really hope that you do, in terms of our own career growth, in terms of providing that impact, that's where you take it to the next level of not just understanding, like, hey, am I generating impact, but understanding who are the partners that care about what pieces of metrics, insights, what impacts them as well to help support you. So if you're not already thinking about that and you're like, how do I grow within my sales enablement professionalism and just knowledge? Start thinking outside of your box, right? It's about your scope, not just within enablement, not just within sales, but for the entire company. And as that grows, then you know that you're up leveling in your sales enablement profession, right?
Such a good point, Charles. Yeah. And I think that's just important in terms of each of us being able to own, right, how we grow as an enabler and take control of our careers. So
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll be providing more of these little tips for sales enablement professionals, as to help you grow, to help you think a little bit more in terms of what your role is for the entire company, and as that grows. So, you know what? I think this is a great place to end. We've talked a little bit about what impacts mean, what are the benefits of impact, who really cares about these pieces of impact, and how that helps you professionally. So, did you have a great time talking about this today?
Yes. Yeah, no, such an important topic, and really the foundation to talking more and understanding more about how different functions within the business can come together and really execute on reaching those goals. So yeah, I think this was great. Good start.
Yay! Good starting point. And of course, as any piece of content that has to be effective, call to action. So, what are we asking from all of you who are watching? Number one, comment in the comments of this, wherever the platform is that we're sharing this. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What does impact mean to you? Who are you providing impact for? And then also, like, tell us what you want to see in regard to different episodes of this. So we'll just sign us out. Thank you, Natalie, for being
Thank
here with me today. Yes,
you.
and we'll see all of you later. Have a great day. Bye.